Good morning, everyone. And today we shall move on to the next topic. That is the next in the next unit to discuss about Karl Marx contribution to various concepts and ideas, especially leading us to more intense discussion on the idea of socialist thought and Marxist, or rather, what we would from here on call as Marxist thought. Uh, uh, Before we begin, we must let me introduce to you who is Karl Marx. Karl Heinrich Marx, he is a German philosopher, you can say, and he was born on the 5th of May 1818 and he died on 14 March 1883. Uh, he was a great critic of political economy. He is also an economist himself, historian. You may call him by whatever kind of stream that you want to call, because he has had immense contribution in the field of social sciences. So he was, as I said, he was born in a place known as Trier, Germany. He studied law, philosophy in the universities of Bonn and Berlin, and he married a German theater critic and political activist whose name was Jenny von Westphalen in 1843. So, due to his political publication, Marx became stateless and he lived in exile with his wife and children in London for decades, where he actually continued to develop his thought in collaboration with German thinker Friedrich Engels, and he published his writings, researching, particularly from the British Museum reading room. Uh, as we all know, there are many of his ideas that are still prevalent till today. Not only prevalent, very influential, and they are, so to say, evolving with time, and they are constantly influencing world politics, national politics, and even regional politics. One of the most best known titles that Marx has been known for is the pamphlet known as the Communist Manifesto and the three-volume known as Das Kapital. And Marx's political and philosophical thought had been, as I said, been of great influence to various intellectuals, various economists, political theorists, historians, and so on and so forth, that you may call him as the master of social theory. Um, you see, before we begin, we must understand that Marx, having lived during his time, he was critical, or he developed rather critical theories about society, economics, politics, and all his contributions are known today as the Marxist thought or Marxism as such. So, therefore, one of the basic ideas of Karl Marx is that he developed a theory, all his theory, to say that history or human society have developed through class conflict. This he took from, of course, Hegel, and of course he also took this idea from Engels himself. So, therefore, because of his writings, because of his ideas and contributions, and because of the new stream of thoughts, new paradigm shift in the understanding of society, economy, and so on and so forth, Karl Marx has often been treated also as a revolutionary, an activist rather than a philosopher. And as I said earlier, His work has inspired the foundation of many communist regimes in the 20th century. And it is really hard to find many thinkers who can be said to have had a comparable influence in the creation of modern world as that of Karl Marx. Because as I said, whether you talk of the right wing ideas of politics or the left wing ideas of politics, the foundation of all ideological basis now has become has become Marxism. So therefore one cannot ignore the influence of Karl Marx and his so-called thought known as Marxism. However, you see, Marx was trained as a philosopher, and although often portrayed as moving away from philosophy in his mid 20s, yet towards towards history and social sciences, there are so many points of contact between modern philosophical debates throughout his writings. Although, as I repeat again, although Karl Marx may have been seen as a social scientist or as somebody who is more concerned about history and social sciences, yet much of his writings have also been the basis of philosophical debates through his writings and beyond his writings. One of the most important ideas that Karl Marx has contributed to is, the whole understanding of alienation, the whole understanding of class conflict, then the surplus value, and among all these, the basis of all these discussion will be discussed today, and that is we shall discuss what is known as historical materialism or materialist conception of history. This is primarily because, as we have said, although Karl Marx is largely a philosopher, he is most importantly concerned about the development of historical understanding of human life or social of the order society. And therefore, before we even discuss further, I think it would be better for us to start with the first topic, and that is the topic of historical materialism. So, you see, in 1845, Karl Marx was expelled from France, and immediately after he was expelled from France, Marx penned his famous thesis known as the 11 Theses on Feuerbach. So, what did he say in this? Karl Marx said that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. I repeat again, this is very important statement, and it will further get intrigued as we move ahead. And this is that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So basically what Karl Marx was trying to say is that, yes, people have interpreted various phenomena, various events, epoch of civilization. But now we are living in a particular epoch of history, therefore the point is now to change it, to change the world. By saying so, Karl Marx, this does not necessarily indicate that Karl Marx was not interested in interpreting history, but rather while interpreting history, he was also concerned about developing methods, approaches, strategies as to how to actually change the existing structural problems that existed in the world in which he lived in. So therefore, you see, these the 11 Theses of Feuerbach, It is said that this was actually, these were actually notes that he penned for his writing on the German ideology, which he published with Friedrich Engels. And this actually is something, it is here that actually Karl Marx set out his ideas along with Friedrich Engels to develop what is known as the materialist conception of history, or later known as historical materialism. Um, but of course, unfortunately, most of Karl Marx's writings were not published until during his lifetime. For example, the thesis on Feuerbach did not see the light of day for over 40 years when Engels, he published them as an appendix to his book Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy in 1888. So, therefore, after the publication of this thesis on Feuerbach, this book became one of Marx's most well-known aphorism. And today it is said that if you visit Karl Marx's grave, you would see 11 theses engraved at the bottom of his tomb, which signify the importance of this particular text of Karl Marx. So, as I said earlier, while Marx was talking about changing the world, he did not actually abandon the task of interpreting the world. After all his life, he only tried to do that. He tried to explain the various, as I said, phenomena that took place and how these various phenomena contributed to the existing conflict in the society. So, therefore, what Karl Marx was rather concerned about is that he did not necessarily engage himself in interpreting philosophy or interpreting the world just for the sake of interpreting. He wanted to interpret the world so that we become ready for change. So, theory is valuable for Karl Marx precisely because it can help us change the world. Okay. So, therefore, this is the point of Marx's theory of history, you can say, and Engels have given one of the best short summary of the approach to history that he and Karl Marx has actually developed. And I quote the saying of Friedrich Engels. I'm sorry, actually, we are not able to meet physically. Otherwise, in my cupboard, I have this text written by Engels himself. He said, Marx discovered the law of development of human history. Who developed the law of development of human history? He said Marx, or rather Karl Marx, is the one who discovered the law of development of human history. The simple fact, hitherto concealed, or the simple fact that so far has been concealed by an overgrowth of ideology. You see, a very important fact that has been concealed because of the growth of ideology is that mankind must first of all eat, drink, have shelter and clothing before it can pursue politics, science, arts, religion, etc. So what Engels is saying, that Marx is the one who developed the human history, because Karl Marx is the one who talked about materialism, the real existence, the environment that influenced his existence, and which has been concealed to us for very long because of the impact of ideology. What was that basic idea? The basic idea that Marx has therefore been successful in telling us that before any human being would think about anything else, he must have food, should be able to drink, he should have shelter and clothing before he can pursue anything, whether it is politics, science, art, and religion. That therefore, I continue, that therefore the production of the immediate material means of subsistence subsequently the degree of economic development attained by a given people or during a given epoch form the foundation upon which the state institution, the legal conceptions, art, and even the idea of on religion of the people concerned have been evolved, and in the light of which they must therefore be explained instead of vice versa as had hitherto been the case. I repeat again, therefore, that therefore the production of immediate material means of subsistence. So therefore, before everything else, the production of the means of the material means for survival. For example, first of all, people should have food to eat. Therefore, first of all, the first production should be the production of food, for subsistence, for survival. Consequently, the degree of economic development attained by a given people, which means, therefore, because of the production of agricultural produce, the economic development that happens around that, agricultural economy, or during a given epoch. So, therefore, during that particular period of time, he says, form the foundation upon which the state institution, legal conception, art, and even idea of religion of the people concerned have been evolved. So, which means, naturally, first of all, people being able to have their food, and therefore, if they are going to have their food, the means of production of that food will be the basis of the economy around that environment, and therefore, because of the existing economy around that environment in which man can actually survive, revolve, first of all, the idea of the state institution, which means, whoever has the means of production, he will be the boss, or he will be the legitimate authority, or he will control the society. Then, after that, what happens is he will be the one who will form the legal basis of that particular society. And therefore, because he is going to be the basis upon which the legal authority will be formed, therefore, all other aspects like arts, ideas, even ideas on religion, maybe he will ask people to worship him, or maybe he will say, let us worship a particular god that he that he is endeared to, or he may do something else. So therefore, everything will evolve around that particular means of production and the system around it, and in the light of which they must therefore be explained. And therefore, Angel says, therefore, if you are going to explain history, history has to be explained in this particular way, and not vice versa. Not, not the way other people have explained. So to say that, Shah Jahan built this, Akbar built this, Maurya Empire built this. No. But we must understand that it is, first of all, the basis of the means of production. What is that means of production? First of all, before the means of production is the necessity for man to eat, to drink, to have shelter and clothing. Okay, so Angels calls the way production is organized, and the level of economic development that a society has achieved, the foundation on which other ideas and institutions rest. So Angels, he says that the way in which production is organized, the way in which our economic activity is organized, that is the foundation on which other ideas and institutions they rest. Elsewhere, Angels, along with Karl Marx, sometimes they call it as the base that support a legal and political and even cultural superstructure. So therefore, at other instances, we study this historical materialism as the base and superstructure. So therefore, what do they suggest? They say that You see, the base are the people, are the means of production, are the way in which people engage themselves in the economic activity, and out of this base we produce a superstructure. And sometimes, those in the superstructure, like the state institution, the legal authority, the police, and so on and so forth, they do not understand that if the base is changed, the superstructure can be changed, or the superstructure can be brought down. So therefore, this is what Angels is saying, that that therefore what we have to understand is the means of production, and this means of production produce the legal, political, and cultural superstructure. So therefore, in using this metaphor, Marx and Engels are not necessarily proposing that the influence only goes in one direction, or rather that it is not necessarily that legal, political, and even religion ideas can affect the way in which production is organized. For example, you see, but the basic claim of historical materialism, therefore, is that over a long run, it is the productive base of the society that has by far the biggest effect on how society develops. So the basis of any social development is therefore the means of production. The means of production. So therefore, the means of production determine our consciousness. Our economic relationship determines our consciousness. That is what Karl Marx will say in this historical materialism, which means that the environment in which we live in order to survive and the structure around it will determine our consciousness. So therefore, since we are in a capitalist system, our consciousness is also that we have to compete with each other, we have to get richer, we have to become more dominant, we have to become authoritative, and therefore we have to dictate the terms of others. So if the base in some way explains the superstructure, then we should expect that the fundamental change in society as a whole to be due to changes in the base. That is what Karl Marx and Engels are trying to say. So if we are going to change this, if we have realized that the superstructure is actually the outgrowth of the base, then changing of the base can certainly help us succeed in changing the superstructure. So, therefore, Marx's most famous short description of how this comes about is contained actually in the preface that he wrote for his book known as a contribution to the critique of political economy, which was published in 1859. So, in the social production of their existence, he says, man inevitably enter into a definite relations, which are dependent on their will. So, therefore, this relationship, this relation of production actually appropriate to a given stage in the, in the development of their material forces of production. So basically what Karl Marx is saying is that in the social production of their existence, which means if we are going to live in the society, if we are going to exist in the society, therefore we have to enter into a definite relation, with somebody or with the system or with the environment. And he says these are independent of their will. They are entering into this relationship independent of their will, which means they may not will so. Now, if you are going to live in Silchar, for example, if you are living in Barak Valley, you have to understand that you have a definite relationship, that first of all you have to in some way or the other speak Bengali or the Bengali dialect that is available there. Number two is maybe the major economic activity of Barak Valley would be fish production, and therefore you have to train yourself to be a fisherman, or help others train to be fishermen. Or rather, since you are in Barak Valley, you know very well that in summer it is extremely humid, and therefore you have to cope to that environment. Or rather, maybe you know that till very recent past, if you have to travel outside of Barak Valley, then the means of traveling was only then through the bus services that were being provided, and of course later train and now flights have also come in. So therefore, this is the kind of relationship that we have to enter, and this is independent of our will, whether we want it or we don't want it. It is independent. So namely, relation of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production, which means during a particular epoch of when the environment was having a particular system of production. So the totality of these relations of production, he says, constitute the economic structure of the society. So therefore, the totality of the kind of relationship we have, maybe the first instance is I'm going to live in a society, therefore first I have to eat, and therefore agriculture is important. Then I have to drink. Therefore, our relationship with the department that supplies us water is important. Then, since I'm living, therefore, I need a house. So, our relationship with the construction workers are important, and so on and so forth. So, therefore, the totality of these relations of production, he says, constitute the economic structure of the society. That is how the society, therefore, will have its economic base. I will be able to survive because of these services being provided to me and the nature upon which I pay them. So therefore, he says this is the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. So therefore, what Karl Marx is saying is this relationship of production that constitute the economic structure, that is the real foundation of the social relation. This give rise to a legal and political superstructure, and therefore this forms the social consciousness of the people. Our consciousness is certainly determined by this kind of relationship. So the mode of production of material life conditions, the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. You see, this is the most important aspect that we must understand, that the mode of production of material life conditions, or the mode of production of material life, determines the general process of the social, political, economic, intellectual life that we may be having. So it is not the consciousness of men that determine their existence, but the social existence that determine their consciousness. Okay, let me see if somebody is wanting to join. Okay, nobody is wanting to join. So therefore, I repeat again, please remember this statement. This is the core of every statement. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence. It is not our consciousness that determines our existence. We are not existing because we have moral, because of our moral consciousness or whatever economic consciousness, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. So therefore, this economic relationship that we have determines our consciousness. This is basically, you can say, the major statement of materialist conception. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. So the force or the forces of production are all the elements needed, you see, to act upon and change the natural world in any particular historical period. This is what Karl Marx says. So therefore, if you want to change the society, If you want to change the natural environment, then you have to change the forces of production. You see, you have to change the forces of production. So, which means in our society, the forces of production today is capitalist system. So, if you want to change the world, then you have to change the capitalist system. Once upon a time, there was slave society, then the feudal society, and now we have arrived at a capitalist society. And therefore, if we want to change our consciousness, if we want to change the natural world in any particular historical period, therefore, we need to change this capitalist system into socialist system. That is what Karl Marx is saying. So, so therefore, you see, Hegel, while developing his dialectics, he says that one epoch developed into another epoch of history because of the dialectics, which mean the theses, or maybe at some point the society was very good, very congenial with each other, and they appreciate each other. But then arrived a period where people started questioning the existing social structure, and this therefore lead to the that is the antithesis, and then therefore this lead to the next level, that is the synthesis, where new civilization will evolve. So exactly, Karl Marx is also saying in a more forceful manner that the forces of production are all the elements needed to act upon to change the natural world. So therefore, but you see one very important thing, the labor process does not by itself tell us what kind of social society we have, you see, the labor process. So Marx, as he put it in his Das Kapital, volume 1, he says, the taste of porridge does not tell us who grew the oats, and the process we have presented does not reveal the condition under which it takes place, whether it is happening under the slave owner brutal lash or the anxious eyes of the capitalist. So therefore, you see the process, you see the existing labor system does not necessarily explain to us that the existing economic, social and political order actually is the kind of system that we need to change. So therefore, it does not necessarily tell us that what is the source of the problem. You see, just like the porridge that we eat may not tell, the taste of the porridge may not tell us who actually grew the oats. And in the same way, you see, the slave owner brutal lash or the anxious eyes of the capitalist also will not tell us what is the actual problem. So therefore, this brings us to the relations of production, which describes to us who control the labor process and who controls the output of the labor process. So therefore, it is for us to understand that since we are talking about the relation of production, then we must go to the root of it to ask the question as who control the labor process and who control the output of labor process. So he says, for the past several thousand years, human societies have been divided into antagonistic classes. So he says that throughout human history, thousands of years, human society have always been divided into two antagonistic classes. And this class structure of any given society at any given point in history might have been quite complicated, but there are generally only two central classes. One that consists, one group consists, creation, or one group consists those who are the direct producers, which means the laborers. And who actually only work to meet their own needs, but also results in the creation of surplus. over and above what is required for immediate consumption, and the other group consists of people who control the surplus. So, what Karl Marx is saying is, in all historical development, people have always been divided into various classes, but centrally there are two classes. One is the class that that are actually directly engaged in the process of production, like the laborers, like the farmers, and so on and so forth. Yet, what do? They only work to meet their own needs. They are being paid, and therefore they are paid minimally for the kind of produce that they produce. And actually what they do is, they do not necessarily work only to feed themselves, but they work more, and therefore those who own the means of production, they are the one who control that surplus, and that is the surplus that is extracted from the laborers, from the farmers, and that is something that helps the owners of production to actually take control of our life. Take control of our life, because then they would control everything else. Now we come to historical development. He says in the slave societies, slaves produce surplus, which is controlled by slave owners. In feudal societies, peasants produce surplus, which is controlled by feudal lords. In capital societies, workers create surplus value, which is then controlled by the capitalist. So he says it is these relations of production that define the society. So in earliest human societies, there was little surplus produced, and few goods that were produced were mostly owned in common. You see, you can say in a socialist communitarian society, there was little surplus being produced, and few goods that were in surplus, they were owned by common. Just like in tribal society, in most of the tribal society, even till today, this is the nature of relationship. So these, he says, were primitive communist societies with no class differentiation. Since then, we have seen a variety of class societies, each one distinguished by a specific way in which the rulers extract surplus from direct producers. So therefore, in Das Kapital Volume 3, Karl Marx says the specific economic form in which unpaid surplus labor is pumped out of direct producers determines the relationship of rulers and ruled, which means the more surplus the rulers gain, the more powerful he is, and that is how he will subjugate the rule even more. And it grows directly out of production itself, and determines, and in turn reacts upon it as the determining element. So therefore, he says it is always the direct relationship of the owners of the condition of production to the direct producers, and therefore you see the sum of all society's relations of production therefore constitute its economic structure. And it is on this, you see, that Marx says the legal, political and cultural superstructure, they rest. So therefore, when we talk of this historical materialism, two things should be noted about the relations of production. First, in class societies, they involve not just specific relationship of the ruling class to the direct producers, but also the relationship of the members of the ruling class to each other, how they try to come together, consolidate together to be able to suppress the ruled class, and the relationship of the rulers in one region or country to the rulers of another, which means not only among them, but from one nation to another. Second, there is an important relationship between the level of development of the forces of production and the specific relation of production that exists within a society. So therefore, Karl Marx says that the relation of production correspond to or are appropriate to specific stage of development of the forces of production. What actually means is that at minimum, uh, not every set of relation of production is compatible with a given level of development of the forces of production. You see, the forces of production puts limit to what relation of production are possible. So the more you produce, then the more actually is the intense nature of exploitation. So therefore, how does society change? Marx thinks the distinction, therefore, is for human being to change the nature of the mode of production. So this is what is known as historical materialism, or the materialist conception of history. Let me not go further. Of course, we can discuss more, but I think so far you have already understood what is the crux of the materialist conception of history. So I end my lecture here. If you have any question, thank you very much.